We want to begin a 4-week sermon series on the life of Jonah. Now, is there anybody here who thinks that you have learned everything that you can possibly learn from the story of Jonah? Let me see your hand. Okay, you can come up here and preach this sermon series for me. Most of us learned something about Jonah when we were just little kids in Sunday school, I suppose, or we happened to pick up a book that talked about this interesting character called Jonah who got swallowed by a big fish. If that's all we know about Jonah, there is much, much more that this story has to tell us. And I believe that as the weeks go by and we dig a little deeper into this story, that God has something that will be helpful and positive for us as we seek to serve God in ways that are different and innovative and challenging. So I'm going to read the first chapter of Jonah from a fairly new translation by Eugene Peterson called The Message. It's in very contemporary English, and I think it will breathe new life into this old story. Here we go. One day, long ago, God's word came to Jonah, Amittai's son. Up on your feet and on your way to the big city of Nineveh. Preach to them. They're in a bad way, and I can't ignore it any longer. But Jonah got up and went the other direction to Tarshish, running away from God. He went down to the port of Joppa and found a ship headed for Tarshish. He paid the fare and went on board, joining those going to Tarshish, as far away from God as he could get. But God sent a huge storm at sea, the waves towering. The ship was about to break into pieces. The sailors were terrified. They called out in desperation to their gods. They threw everything they were carrying overboard to lighten the ship. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down into the hold of the ship to take a nap. He was sound asleep. The captain came to him and said, "What's this? You're sleeping? Get up! Pray to your God. Maybe your God will see we're in trouble and rescue us." Then the sailors said to one another, "Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's draw straws to identify the culprit on this ship who's responsible for this disaster." So they drew straws. Jonah got the short straw. Then they grilled him. "Confess. Why this disaster? What is your work? Where do you come from? What country? What family?" He told them, "I'm a Hebrew. I worship God, the God of heaven, who made sea and land." At that, the men were frightened, really frightened, and said, "What on earth have you done?" As Jonah talked, the sailors realized that he was running away from God. They said to him, "What are we going to do with you to get rid of this storm?" By this time, the sea was wild, totally out of control. Jonah said, "Throw me overboard, into the sea. Then the storm will stop. It's all my fault. I'm the cause of the storm. Get rid of me, and you'll get rid of the storm." But no, the men tried rowing back to shore, but they made no headway. The storm only got worse and worse, wild and raging. Then they prayed to God, "Oh God, don't let us drown because of this man's life, and don't blame us for his death. You are God. Do what you think is best." They took Jonah and threw him overboard. Immediately, the sea quieted down. The sailors were impressed. No longer terrified by the sea, but in awe of God, they worshiped God, offered a sacrifice, and made vows. Then God assigned a huge fish to swallow Jonah. Jonah was in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The Church of the Rogue. The Church of the Rogue. The first time I heard that phrase was sometime in late March or April. It was after Pastor John and Linda had sent me a packet of information about this church. We had agreed that Lori and I would come and be with you for 6 weeks. I would be here to fill the pulpit while Pastor Linda was on her pilgrimage in Spain, do the preaching and help out wherever I can. And I'm not exactly sure where it was, perhaps on a bulletin or some other piece of information that they had sent in that package, but there it was, that phrase, the Church of the Rogue. And I cannot tell you how that gripped my imagination. I could not get away from that phrase, the Church of the Rogue. Now, I realize that you can understand that phrase in a couple of different ways. The Church of the Rogue physically locates this church, of course, in the Rogue River Valley. The Rogue River is beautiful. Lori and I have our RV parked out in Shady Cove, and the Rogue River flows by less than 100 feet from our front door. We enjoy it immensely being there. But the Church of the Rogue, to you, and also more and more to me, means more than just some phrase that physically locates us here in Medford, Oregon, doesn't it? It means much, much more. A while ago, I decided to do something that none of us do very much anymore. I pulled the dictionary off the shelf, and I went into the R section, and I looked up this interesting word, rogue. And interestingly enough, there are quite a few different possible definitions for this English word. It told me that it's been around in the English language since at least the 1500s, and over time, its meaning has been nuanced and changed slightly from its original definition and meaning, which was not very complimentary at all. Back in the 1500s, the word rogue was used to describe characters whom you and I wouldn't want to meet alone in a dark and stormy night. But over time, that definition has changed somewhat. And now, in the 21st century, part of what the word rogue possibly means is this: someone who does not conform to traditional and expected norms. Someone who does not conform to traditional and expected norms. And when we understand rogue in that sense, then I like even more the title that you have adopted for your church, the Church of the Rogue. We're going to explore that through looking at the life of Jonah over the next several weeks. Here's another thing that I want us to understand as we look at Jonah's life. The early Hebrews who first wrote this story about this interesting character, this prophet named Jonah, meant for the original readers and for us, thousands of years later, to understand Jonah in a particular literary way. Jonah is every man. And every man is a storyteller's way of saying this hero, this protagonist represents each and every one of us, represents humanity. And so when we look at Jonah's story, I invite us to seriously consider that I am Jonah and Jonah is me. I am Jonah and Jonah is me. I'm not really troubled by whether or not you choose to believe that Jonah is a story of a man literally true who got swallowed by a literal fish. That doesn't really matter. It doesn't impact one way or another the story, the truth, the meaning that God wants us to get from this story, whether you believe the story is literally true or metaphor. It is a powerful story. And if we can see, as we look at this man, Jonah, that I am Jonah and Jonah is me, we'll be helped, we'll be blessed, we'll understand better how God is calling us to be people who identify as followers of the rogue, followers of Jesus Christ. The first thing, as we look at this chapter 1, and this is kind of an introduction to where we will be over the next several weeks, but the first thing that I want us to understand is this, that God's call to each and every one of us can often be inconvenient. God's call can be inconvenient. We don't know a whole lot about the prophet Jonah before the story starts to tell us about what God wanted him to do. Go to Nineveh and preach to those people. But just from what we understand about the life of a Hebrew prophet in that day and age, we can kind of gather that Jonah's life was probably going along fairly okay. It wasn't easy to be a prophet in Israel during those days. Prophets were not very well thought of. In fact, Frankie, there's an old Israeli country and western song that was written about prophets. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be prophets. Because prophets were truth tellers. And a lot of people in that day, and today as well, don't like to hear the truth. And when the prophets would speak truth, inconvenient truth, people would not just call a meeting of the pastor-parish relations committee and deal with things there. They would pick up rocks and they would stone them to death. It wasn't easy to be a prophet. And so, simply by virtue of the fact that Jonah was still alive at the time that the book that bears his name in the Old Testament picks up his story, we can infer that he must have found some way to at least get along from day to day, to survive. But now, God's call comes to him and says, Jonah, pack your Samsonite rolling bag and get ready to go to Nineveh. I've got some things that I want you to say to those folks over there. They're in a bad way. They need help. And it was not convenient at all for Jonah to respond positively to that call. He packed his bag all right, but instead of going to Nineveh, he headed in the opposite direction, as far away from God as he could possibly get. And that's the second point that I want us to get from chapter 1 of Jonah's story. Not only can God's call be inconvenient, but secondly, God's gift to each and every one of us of free will says that we can in fact say no to God if we choose to do so. God never forces us to do something that we have decided we will not do. Theologians have sometimes talked about this gift of free will as the Creator's greatest gamble. But it is a precious gift. It means that we are not like some puppets on a string being manipulated by some heavenly puppeteer. We have the opportunity to choose to love and obey God, or to choose to shake our fist, as it were, in God's face and say, no, I will not do what you are asking me to do. Jonah, the truth speaker, the prophet, the one whom we can only assume had been faithfully serving his God up until that time, at this point says, no, God, I will not do it. Somehow, God, you have got your wires crossed. You're not thinking clearly today, God. Why in the world would you want me to go to that wicked place and preach to those people that no decent, God-fearing Hebrew would have anything to do with? If you're thinking along with me, you can already start to draw some pretty contemporary parallels to Jonah's story. But finally, for this morning, not only can God's call be inconvenient, secondly, not only can we reject and say no to God, but thirdly, and oh, this is the best one for this morning. If you haven't heard a thing that I've said this morning, I invite you to wake up for a moment and hear this one. God's grace is always available to you and to me, even in the most desperate situations, even in the midst of outright obedience. You see, as chapter 1 closes, Jonah is in a pretty desperate situation. He's been tossed overboard by the sailors on that ship. The only way that they could save the ship and themselves, tossed into the violent sea. And what does the story writer say? God prepared a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and he was in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I mean, I don't really like fish to begin with. But to think about residing for 3 days in the belly of a fish, I can't imagine anything much worse than that. But even in as desperate a situation as we can possibly imagine, God was there with Jonah. God's grace, God's love, God's mercy reached out to him. And what do we learn from that? A simple yet wonderful, wonderful truth. You can never run away from a loving, merciful God. God is, you see, the God of the second chance. And oh, how thankful we need to be for that truth. God is the God of the second chance. I'd love to tell you, if we had time, but we don't, how just the fact that I am standing here, a retired United Methodist clergy person, being able to preach this morning, it's because God is the God of the second chance. God gave me a second chance. I didn't deserve it, but God gave me a second chance. And God has done the same for you. A second, maybe even a third or fourth time. God's grace reaches out to Jonah even in the midst of disobedience. We're going to leave Jonah's story there for this morning. And maybe, I know this is a radical idea, but maybe sometime this week, if you think about it, you could pull out your Bible and read the 2nd chapter of Jonah and start thinking about where we'll be next year. I don't want to get too radical, but that I'm just saying, it's a thought. There are some things for us to learn from this rogue prophet, Jonah. And I pray that we will learn together all that God wants us to learn.